Buonasera, guten Abend. I wish you a warm welcome for this special edition of our Rendezvous Goethe. It's special because I have three guests today with Anja Zückmantel from Greece, with Lars Ebert from the Netherlands, and Jasper Schalkraft from England, I think, actually. We have three guests from three countries, from three different institutions, and I'm glad that you are all here. Thanks a lot. And we will talk about a European project, Heritage Contact Zone. So you may see, oh, a European project, maybe this is very technical, but I promise you that we will try to make it as clear as possible what this European project is dealing with, and you will see it's a very interesting thing. Heritage Contact Zone, this is the title of the project, is funded by Europe in the frame of the European Year of Cultural Heritage. In the 2 years of this project, the last 2 years, we investigated the potential of heritage spaces for creative processes and dialogue. We focused on contested, neglected or marginalized heritage with exhibitions, workshops, and a toolkit we will talk about a little bit later. And the main point is, and this is for us also very interesting because we will talk about this fact also, one day after yesterday was, as you know, the commemoration day of Holocaust, how we deal with cultural heritage in times where, for instance, for example, the testimonials are not anymore there. How can we create understanding and dialogue by evoking cultural heritage? But first of all, we will show you, before we go into discussion with our guests, we show you a small film, a video of 2 minutes, which explains us a little bit more about this project.
Hi, my name is Joachim and I'm the director of the Goethe-Institut of Bucharest. And before I came to Bucharest, I was in Marseille, and there I was actively involved in our project.
Hi, I'm Cristina Modranu, co-curator of Theatre as Resistance project in the frame of Timișoara 2021.
My name is Jasper Schalkraft. I work at the European University Institute, and I'm an anthropologist.
My name is Lars Ebert. I'm a co-director of the Cultural Center H401 in Amsterdam, a historical house in the Canal District with a very particular history that ranges from hiding to a sectarian group and the home of an artist.
My name is Anja Zückmantel. I work at Ezrayim Synagogue in Hagia on Crete.
I am Ovidiu Dashbog-Miron. I represent Timișoara 2021, European Capital of Culture.
I am András Lukács. I am the president of the Human Platform and also an activist of the Living Memorial Group in Budapest.
My name is Konstantin Fischer. I am the curator of the exhibition Parallel Points of View, organized by Ezrayim Synagogue Hagia.
My name is Cristina Zamfirescu. I work for the Goethe-Institut Bucharest, and I'm in charge for the Heritage Contact Zone website. I hope that you are now much more familiar with the Heritage Contact Zone working group, and please don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
So you know already a little bit more about Heritage Contact Zone, but we will go a little bit more into details with our guests, and I will start to ask some questions to Lars. Lars, who is the lead of this project and our lead manager, so to say, and we had an excellent cooperation during the last years. And I just wanted to ask you, Lars, the first question: why is the institution you are working for so especially interested in heritage and cultural heritage?
Thanks, Joachim. But I'm playing it back to you now. We are in this together for many years. It's not our first project. It's a project, EU project chain, actually, that we are developing, and we hope for a next step. We in Amsterdam are interested in this project because we are a foundation in the historical center of Amsterdam in a 17th century canal house that has a long history, but the most important one for us is that it was a house of a painter, the late artist Giselle, who died at the age of 100 years in 2013 in the building where our foundation with a gallery and all our events is situated. And in this lifespan of 100 years, 70 of which she lived in the building, she left a lot of traces that go back to a situation of hiding during World War II until a very eventful life as a painter and a social figure in a very problematic, also literary circle of an exiled German poet. And all that history is materialized in the building, in interiors, artworks, little objects, and a lot of stories that are represented by the objects. And our big question is, how can we make this history accessible, a very complex history? How can we make it accessible in a way that it is part of a conversation and not to slave it, so to speak, by one story that would simplify the beauty of a complex history. So for us, this project meant we could experiment with forms to involve an audience to discover history for themselves.
I have to underline the fact that that you are living amongst this object, so to say. This house is not only a kind of museum, but it's also a place where people live. So, and this is also very interesting to have this mixture between something you are living in, you are planning cultural events, you're organizing cultural events, lectures, and other discussions in this building. So could we compare it a little bit to? So to say, it's like a little bit like the Anne Frank house. It's not as famous naturally, but the style is the same. Would you agree?
Yes and no. The story is, of course, a little bit the same because it goes back to the same situation that Jewish people needed to hide during the German occupation of the Netherlands. But it's not the same because we didn't institutionalize ourselves as a museum, and we don't have 1 million tourist visitors in front of our door every day. But we kept everything in the house in the fragility as it is. And we are also embracing the decay, so to speak, the fact that the objects are vanishing and that they may also vanish if an artist works with objects and transfers them into something new. But we think that this is also why we live there and why we have residencies for artists also to also spend time there, that working with history creates something new. And these new layers are the most important aspects.
It was for you the core of your methodology was to work with artists on historical objects. Am I right?
Yes. Also, although I must say in this particular project, we have worked with not objects from our house, as we had intended in the beginning, but with a more colonial history of the Netherlands, which is, of course, also all around us in the 17th century center. And we've worked with 17th century objects and the travel history.
Yes, and this is for all now it is very, very interesting because I don't know if you read the news about the Netherlands, but there's a big discussion about the classical period, so to say, of the Dutch culture, which is called the Golden Eeuw, this kind of a century where very important artworks were created, but created, as we know now, also on the base of people being rich by exploiting other people, so to say, slavery and colonial history. So I think it's very interesting, and that you have chosen this topic before we had really this discussion, and this shows also why it is so pertinent, so important to deal with these topics in this way.
Yes, definitely, and the discussion was very much, as you said, about, for instance, the naming of the 17th century. Do we further call it the Golden Age? Although the gold of this age is due to the blood of exploited people. And another interesting example is, because you mentioned the Holocaust Remembrance Day, there was a speech in the Dutch Parliament by the leader of the Green Party that referred to the Holocaust and referred to the human victims of the Holocaust, and immediately sparked a big discussion. He should have said Jews and not humans. And no matter what you think about it, you can see that how you speak about those histories is loaded with a lot of emotions. And I think this is something in our project also that was interesting. How can we take a conflict like this and talk about it in a creative way?
Last question to you during this first round, Lars. But you said you deal with other histories than the history of your house, and we have to say, even if the Holocaust plays an important role in our project as a whole, we have different approaches to the Holocaust, also from our Hungarian friends and partner, for instance. We had also other examples we will talk about in a minute, dealing with other historical conflicts or problems or neglected aspects. But what is the contested history in your case? What is contested?
In our case, it is very, very obvious that the kind of founding myth of our organization goes back to the hiding of two Jews and other youngsters that escaped, that deserted from the army. And there was a whole network of friends around Giselle and Wolfgang Frommel that survived in hiding there. But in hindsight, and with testimonies of second generation people from that circle, we also know that Wolfgang Frommel also sexually abused youngsters. And that makes the place a place where lives have been saved, but also lives have been damaged. So it's very ambiguous how you look at it. It's not a heroic story. It's not a pure story of victims. It's not a black and white history. There are many voices that you have to hear in this instance. And the question is, how do you represent that? And maybe there is not one way to represent that as an institution. So this is why I think that, why I find it interesting to explore possibilities of dialogue, whether a dialogic memory could be developed to be more inclusive of representing a history.
Yeah, thanks for this explanation. You're completely right. And this also shows how actual we were with this project, looking to all the discussions you have now about sexual abuse in sports, for instance, also in gymnastic, in the Netherlands for all, but also in other countries. We have a little bit in every field this debate now, how we deal with this history and how we create this dialogue you are talking about. As I said earlier, we didn't have only topics about Holocaust. We as Germans, for instance, we have chosen let's say the other way around, the Bauhaus, this famous artistic movement, which was also after 45 a little bit the symbol of the good Germany, of another Germany that we had in reality with the Holocaust. So, and we tried also to work out some neglected aspects at this on this topic. But I want to ask Anja about her project, because we wanted to have also in this discussion one very concrete project to know how concretely one of our partners, because we were 7 partners in this project, approached this topic by his special local way.
Yeah, so I've prepared the slide, which will be shown. So thank you, first of all, Joachim, for giving us the opportunity to. So I'm representing Ezrahim Synagogue in Hagia, which itself is, as you can be expected, is an interesting historic place. As an institution, it has been in existence again for about 20 years, even though its history goes back to the 17th century as a synagogue in Hagia. Jewish presence in Crete goes back to the 3rd century BCE, so lots to cover there. So why was Heritage Contact Zone for us? In many ways, Ezrahim itself is a contact zone, because also Ezrahim already represents one narrative that's definitely not at the center of attention in the national narrative of Greece. So the story of Greek Jews is, even within Greece, largely unknown. It's covered only very little, even though to a even more degree today in schools. Also, the area around Ezrahim Synagogue is until today referred to as Evraiki, so as the Jewish quarter. Even though that has for many locals not a specific meaning, they're not really aware of what that's meant in a historical context. So for us, the project was very interesting in the sense that we wanted to add the narrative of Ezrahim, the narrative of the Jewish presence in Crete, to the conversation in the but also in a sense to, let's say, in a way that locals could become more aware of the diversity of what Hagia once represented. So in conversations with friends abroad, I often compare Hagia to Sarajevo, which in many cases it used to be a very multicultural, multi-faith town, which came to an almost abrupt end, at least by the Second World War. There were other developments before. So our project tried to attempt to bring to the forefront, or bring to the discussion, bring to the dialogue, as Lars said before, narratives that are either representing historical periods that are not present in memory of the story of Crete, or to bring to the forefront social groups whose narrative, whose perspective is also neglected. We intentionally called our exhibition Parallel Points of View, and not alternative points of view, because what we wanted to offer were ways, interesting, challenging ways of how to look at the history and at the contemporary society of Crete. And that we felt was, let's say, less threatening or less causing immediate couch this, or if we put this in the context of offering parallel narratives that could be, put next to what's the mainstream narrative at the moment. And I brought this slide just to illustrate, and maybe I'll pick one or two to show our guests tonight what the rationale was behind the exhibition project. So for instance, if you look at the bowl with the greens under the title Cretan Muslims, for me, the symbolic way of how to represent the narrative of a social group that no longer actually lives on Crete, but from a distance is still very much connected to Crete, and much to the, let's say, disinterest of many locals today. So there was an exchange of populations after the First World War of Cretan Muslims who had to leave Crete or Greece in general, and had to go to Turkey, even though ethnically they were actually Cretans, so they were converted local Cretans. And they have kept, let's say, at least in their own definition, they still Cretans. So they're referred to as Giritli. And even in Turkey, they're basically a distinct group. And they especially focus on the Cretan diet. So the Cretan greens that you can see here have a very symbolic meaning. So the participant from this group who took part in the workshop that was basically preparing the exhibition, she made the point that Crete for her are those greens, which of course we felt is a very compelling narrative and contribution also for today's local Cretans to understand that what they consider actually their essential cultural heritage. So because that's actually an indigenous plant of Crete, so it's very local, couldn't get more local. That also people living elsewhere who they might not consider actually Cretans today connect to what they perceive as their heritage through a plant or a food item. Another group that we tried to focus on, and you can already see the kind of the general fairly broad approach. Another group are those of the refugees, and you see the little red boat on the bottom right. So as is quite well known, Greece and also other southern European countries have a quite large refugee population. But very often, of course, the refugee communities are not that integrated or prominently represented in the society. So we made a point of also including the refugee community in the exhibition. And one of the most moving objects they chose was this little plastic boat, which of course is reminiscent of many of the experiences how they even got to Greece. But it's of course also symbolic of the personal loss and traumatization they experienced on their way coming here. And that's just, you know, gives you a general idea of the breadth of the approach we took. And see this as a starting point, you know, to kind of start conversations about these 10 different narratives. And we hope to continue working with the different groups that we brought together here, also, you know, mix them a little bit more. For us, this project was, let's say, a very broad and deep delving into the history and current society of Crete, and we hope to build on this in future
At the end of this discussion, Anja, we will talk briefly about the following project, and but it was very interesting to see your slide with the object. But this reminds us that our project passed also through everyday objects, through the idea how we can create this dialogue with history when there are not more living testimonials. Can, for instance, exhibitions, objects replace, so to say, these testimonials? And this is very important. In a minute, I will ask Jasper to tell us about the product of this project, the toolkit with texts. But this is very important for this project to understand why we did it. Another question, Anja. I think the institution you are representing is a synagogue. But if I'm right, in former times, the synagogue was also a place of interreligious dialogue. There were not only Jewish people, but also people from other communities in this synagogue. Could you just tell us 1 minute about this very interesting fact? Because we know nowadays how separated religions are.
Yeah, so not in former times actually, but very much today. And actually tomorrow there's Tu B'Shvat, so there will be in very limited form actually a Jewish festival be observed. So the interesting story of Etz Chaim is that it was rebuilt in the late 1990s and was rebuilt by a man called Nikos Stavroulakis with the expressed intention to open an open space. So we always call it the Holy Trinity, of course, a little bit sarcastically. The Holy Trinity observed at Etz Chaim is that it's a place of prayer, recollection, and reconciliation. So it's open to everyone, even though Nikos always made the point of, so it is a synagogue, so the services follow Jewish rite. The Sephardi prayer book is used. But what he actually intended was, in a sense, to recreate the atmosphere or the synagogue in Hellenistic times, because the first synagogues were actually built in Greece and in the Eastern Mediterranean already by the 3rd, 2nd century BCE. And because that was at the time when the temple still stood in Jerusalem, so they had a somewhat different role than we today are familiar with that synagogues play. So they were neither exclusive places of worship, but rather, meeting places like a synagogue, a place where people can come together. Nor were they used exclusively for Jewish worship. So they were actually open and also attractive to non-Jews. So in that sense, we're only picking up where, tradition left off in the late Hellenistic period. And so in a sense, that's really what's special about Etz Chaim, and that's also the reason, of course, why I ended up there. So it gives me the opportunity to contribute to that kind of history or kind of heritage being created. And as Lars said earlier, so of course, so what's the, in a sense, the use of history? What does history mean? Because for Etz Chaim, of course, Nikos was always quite aware of the fact that, of course, the community of Etz Chaim today can, of course, not claim continuity to the pre-war community, because that community was lost almost completely. They all perished when they were brought on a ship towards Athens. The ship was sunk, so they all perished in the Holocaust. So the current community, of course, we try to keep the memory alive, and we try to kind of inform the locals also about that part of their heritage. But that, of course, we do as, let's say, distant observers, as historians, like my work. But the community that exists at Etz Chaim today is a new community in this
Thanks a lot for
form.
this passionating explanations, Anja, and we are really glad to have you as a partner in this project, and we hope to continue. And we would have loved to have here all partners of our projects, but the time isn't there to present everybody. But I want to say at least that we had also a partner from Brussels, Culture Europe Action, a partner from Hungary with the Human Platform, and a partner from Romania too. Timișoara, the European Capital of Culture, organized also an exhibition. And we had, last but not least, through Jasper Schallkraft, also a university, a scientific way to look to the things we are doing. And yes, I want to ask Jasper to give us some impressions, some results, and to talk briefly about what we call the toolkit which you can find on our website, of our Heritage Contact Zone website. This toolkit which will be a little bit the result, but also the starting point for our next project. What is specific in this toolkit? What can we do with it, and how can it be used?
Thank you so much, Joachim. These are great questions, very big ones though, so I will try and condense them. I think the first thing to say is what a privilege it's been as an academic to work in a project where the majority of partners are outside the ivory tower, engaging hands-on with the nitty-gritty, the raw material of making culture meaningful and socially inclusive and progressive. And I think the key words that have emerged from everything the three of you have said so far around accessibility, inclusivity, and trying to leverage heritage towards this goal is something we've tried to condense in our toolkit. The key thing to understand about the toolkit, which is our sort of primary academic and practitioner product from this, aside from the exhibitions themselves, which are the direct engagement with the local communities, the toolkit represents, I think, a key question that we all had at the beginning of the project, and which kind of formalized itself during, which was, what did we specifically want to know ourselves as practitioners when we were starting to work with difficult heritage? What kinds of knowledge would be useful to us? What did we need to know, for example, to start working with a community, to keep that community engaged in a meaningful way, and also to deal with the kinds of issues, the kinds of conflict that emerge constantly, I think, in any kind of project, but specifically in projects dealing with contested heritage, the contested past. My sort of academic view on that is a very basic one. It's simply that all heritage is contested to one degree or another. But all of you mentioned specific kinds of heritage that are particularly contested thus far, whether that's around the nature of the Holocaust, whether that's around the nature of sexual abuse around an institution that otherwise had another predominant narrative, or around creating mixed communities that were originally mixed but had lost that sense of their own multiculturality. The toolkit was something we ended up with a format that's based around questions, two kinds of questions. Conceptual questions to help people set up a heritage contact zone, whether you be a small-scale institution, a community group, or perhaps, we hope also, it's of interest to larger cultural institutions that are trying to improve inclusivity in their practice. So we have these conceptual questions and we have practical questions. All of us wrote different bits and pieces of it. It's quite a long toolkit. It's about 46 pages long. But our suggestion has always been that practitioners should dip into it and to pull out the bits and pieces that are useful, specifically useful to them. So we see the end users of this as being everybody from small civil society institutions to artists who are engaged in working with communities around difficult pasts, and also perhaps bigger institutions. We have the good fortune, of course, to have the Goethe-Institut as a big institution with all of that kind of sort of capacity that it has to help us hopefully spread this toolkit beyond this singular project into its next iteration, which we all hope will be realized, and to get our contact methodologies, we've called them in the toolkit, out to a broader range of practitioners. And we kind of want to also offer ourselves up as people that can help in that respect, so that if anybody wants to go and look at the toolkit and they see a question that is particularly relevant, or a series of questions particularly relevant to a problem they're working on, get in touch. You know, we want to help where we can. It's also fairly obvious, I think, and we've touched on it already, just how crucial these issues have been during the duration of the project. You know, we have had the Black Lives Matter movement has been hugely powerful across the world. And its resonance, I think, is going to carry on for a long time. I've seen that. I'm based in Italy normally. I happen to be in the UK at the moment. As you know, in June 2020, the statue of Edward Colston, a slaver in Bristol, was toppled to the ground. It's a very interesting case because this is a statue that the people that have defended it tend to forget the statue was erected actually 170 years after Edward Colston himself died. So it was a sort of Victorian remembrance of this particular individual that was being remembered by people that were pro this statue. But I find many aspects of our toolkit talk still to these ongoing issues.
Would you say the toolkit is a kind of manual? It can be used as a manual, with all the examples and things like this?
I think that's one good way to put it, Joachim. I think it's also a kind of map. When you look at the toolkit and you look at the contents of it, you can see the kind of territory you're looking at when you work with difficult heritage, the different aspects that you're going to have to encounter. You know, the metaphorical equivalent of raging torrents or thick forests that you have to beat your way through, and you have to devise your strategies, save your energy, and work out how you'll traverse that landscape. And take a community with you on that journey. And working with all of you, all of the people who've been involved with the Heritage Contact Zone, I've seen how difficult and challenging it is, but also the impact of working in this very deep way. You know, all of the partners have had a deep history in the places that they work with. They've worked there for a long time. They have deep community engagement, and that's enabled them to, I think, make some first steps, or perhaps, you know, greater steps into improving community relations and improving people's understanding of the past, making it more dialogical, as Lars said.
Yeah, and you're certainly right. History is always contested because history is always changing, as we see if you have a look to the history of our institutions and the way we are considering in a different way history. We talked about sexual abuse and things like this. So in fact, history is always changing by the contemporary way we are considering history. So you said it already, Jasper. It was a very challenging project. It was interesting, and I have to admit I learned a lot during this project too. It is not that we just said, okay, we are reassembling our experience. It was an experience as a project, and that led us to conceive another project, a following project. We applied, we are waiting for the result. Hopefully it will be positive, but we will end up our discussion by asking you, Lars, but Anja and Jasper, you can also add an aspect. What is now interesting in this following project for you in a general way, but also for your institution?
Good question. I mean, we applied for follow-up funding not in the Creative Europe program, which funds our current project, which is a program that funds artistic projects. We now applied in the Erasmus program, which funds educational projects, which gives a clue already where we are heading. Because we feel that the toolkit is just finished at the end of the project, and we have tested it a little bit amongst ourselves. We all have engaged external partners to work with us on a case, looking at the toolkit, whether it's helpful or not. And you asked, Joachim, whether it's a manual, and maybe it can become a manual in the new project. I think now it's rather an aide-memoire, which we have purposefully developed like that, because we have all these questions of which we think practitioners should look at and see whether they are relevant for them. It's like a checklist we are going through. Did I ask myself about the ethics of my project idea? Did I ask myself about community involvement? It's like a list that I go through and that I see whether I've asked myself the right questions before I start. It doesn't give any solutions. Every practitioner needs to find the tailor-made solution for their special situation. So I think in the new project, what we want to do is develop a training to work with the toolkit. The toolkit being a basic aide-memoire, but we want to develop probably a manual now, or a curriculum in which we can work with artists, curators, practitioners, community workers, tour guides, everyone who is engaged in heritage, difficult heritage. Every heritage is difficult, but wants to open up a space of dialogue with what they do. And this is what we have to develop. We have to find trainings, and we hope that a lot of people will join us in the different countries and work with us together. I think what we will do again is, we've got a question, we've got a goal, but we don't know how to get there. We'll first need to see who's around the table and then collaboratively find our way, as we did in this project, which is a beautiful thing to do.
Thanks a lot, Lars. Anja, Jasper, you want to add a word about your concerns in the new project? Anja, maybe?
Yes. If I may, so I'll pick up at the issue of contested heritage. So I hope that the new project, and let's keep fingers crossed, will allow us look to take the toolkit to local practitioners, to local authorities working in the cultural field, to see the merits of contested heritage, because especially in public history or especially for tour guides, the narrative that's usually presented is all but contested, because there's usually one narrative and that's kind of repeated and repeated. And where we started out is that as Ezraïm, we're not really present in this narrative. So something, might be at least missing or can be added. So we see this new phase of the project as a new possibility for dialogue with local practitioners and local stakeholders, to see the advantages and also the, let's say, the positive aspect of contested heritage and conflict, especially, as we said, if it's put to dialogue and to actually further our understanding of the complexities of the past.
And this is the best way, I think, we realize European project after this word that we say, think global, act local. So we have these two aspects in this a very important project. And Jasper, you have the last word of our meeting. Time is running up. So what would be the most interesting point for you from the point of view of a university scientific?
There's so much there, but I think I would like to come back to something Lars was just talking about with this train the trainers, the way we're developing basically a new community of practice. And by developing that new community of practice, that new network, that gives me a lot of hope that actually this is going to become mainstreamed, that cultural institutions, cultural actors will have a better disposition towards being comfortable with uncertainty, to a lesser degree, not always mainstreaming the mainstream narrative. And that's hugely difficult, I think, for many countries, many national narratives to take on board, but I think there is space for it, and I think it can be done. And so I think this project might be part of the building that new community of practice. I would maybe finish with coming to a point made by somebody I've been working with in Brazil, who is an African artist who's been living as he comes from Democratic Republic of Congo in São Tomé and Príncipe. He lives in São Paulo. He talks of cultural hospitality. And what he says is missing in Brazil is the cultural hospitality, not of people, but of institutions. And if institutions had greater cultural hospitality, then there'd be a greater flowering of the potential for cultural interaction, multiculturalism, and everything else. So I think this project, by expanding what all these different practitioners have been doing to more practitioners, can be a part of making this a more mainstream approach.
Thanks a lot, all of you. And I have to add also, because it's true, history is always contested, but sometimes it's more or less contested. We, acting here in Romania, we will have a European funding also to work in the so-called conflict regions, as the Republic of Moldova or Georgia, and also other countries where you have inner conflicts. And we will try to apply some lessons learned during the last project to this kinds of cooperation in this country with more conflictual and more difficult history. So let's round up. Let's say I want to thank you all. It was a very interesting debate, and we hope that we meet here soon again with a new project to inform you. Let's keep fingers crossed. As Anja said, I wish you a very nice evening. Please don't hesitate to contact us about this project, to ask us where to find the toolkit on the website, naturally. And o sera buna.